So today we're driving a 2016 Subaru WRX STI. So when the 2015 STI came out, I feel like a lot of people complained about it not being any different than the previous years. It's the same engine, it makes the same amount of horsepower, and it weighs like 2 more pounds. So it has to be slower, right? Like, what's the point of it? Well, I think a lot of it is in the handling of the car. They redesigned the chassis completely, so it handles really well and it's really tight and it's a lot more rigid.
My name is Chuck. I drive a 2016 Subaru WRX STI. So I bought a 2016 WRX STI base model. It has things that I wanted. It doesn't have a sunroof. I'm tall. No sunroof means more headroom. And it has the Alcantara seat centers, which I always thought was kind of like a cool, feature of the STI. It has the STI performance exhaust, which is a Subaru part. It's warranty through Subaru, etc.
So the chassis on this car is a lot stiffer than the previous generation, and the suspension is actually 40% stiffer than the previous STIs. So really, they focused a lot more on the handling characteristics of the car and the driving experience, rather than just giving it more power. And the steering response on this has been completely fixed. The previous Subaru felt a little bit disengaging from the road, but I feel like I know where all the bumps are in the road. It's really connected.
In all honesty, like, this STI is almost the best of both worlds for me. Like, it gave me what I loved about the old cars, but it brought the old cars, like chassis and everything, kind of into like the 21st century.
So the STI has always been Subaru's flagship car. I mean, it's always been at the top of the range and definitely the best performing car. And 2016 is no exception. This car is amazing, and I think it's honestly the best car that Subaru has made.
Or is it?
My name is Terrell Cook, and I drive a 2016 WRX. To me, the differences between the STI and the WRX is the STI was more of a track-focused car, something a little bit more raw out of the box. And the WRX is something that's a little bit more well-rounded. You can take it to the track, but it's also a good daily driver. Better miles per gallon, it's a little bit softer suspension.
This WRX gets an entirely new motor, the FA20. And unlike the old EJ motors that came in every single STI or WRX before it, the FA20 is actually using equipment from the 21st century, meaning that it has direct injection and it makes a lot more power from a lot less displacement, and it actually manages to return good gas mileage for a 2-liter.
The new engine is more efficient. It still makes decent power, so even though the stock tune is pretty bad, aftermarket I can tune the car to what I want. For me, the future for power, all I want is like around 300 horsepower. So yeah, the STI does give me that out of the box, but power is not all I want, so that's why I think the WRX is a better fit for me.
Maybe that's the best way to describe it. The STI is a little bit more raw. The WRX is like an amazing, great car, but if I bought a WRX, I'd probably put coilovers on it anyway. If I bought, the WRX, I probably would be messing with it anyway. So if you're like looking to decide between the WRX and the STI, the new ones, I mean, the best way is obviously just to drive both and decide which one you like better. There's obviously huge benefits to the new WRX versus the STI, gas mileage. It's way more like livable. It has kind of the mid-range power that this one might be lacking. Suspension in this one is definitely stiffer, the steering and everything. I feel like everything's like a little bit tighter. It's a little bit more like race car is probably the best way to describe it.
So Chuck is still on the factory suspension with this car, and I'm not complaining at all because it feels like it's been modified. I mean, the suspension feels as tight as my car. I'm on coilovers. It's really stiff, so when I'm going over some bumps and stuff, I kind of get a little bit of a jarring effect, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, if you buy an STI, that's what you want. You don't want a soft ride quality. You want a car that goes around corners, and you want a car that feels more sporty, and I mean, that really adds to the effect of the sportiness.
Now, as far as the power of the engines is concerned, the EJ definitely feels a little bit more refined, and that's expected from a motor that's essentially been developed for the past decade and a half. That EJ257 has been around for forever compared to this FA20. The FA20 is much more efficient. It gets way better gas mileage than the EJ, and that's largely in part due to the lower displacement and the direct injection. When you're actually on the power, it makes torque much earlier, but it doesn't impart the same sense of linearity that the STI does. The STI just feels like it's making power and it builds confidently up to red line, whereas with the FA20, you make power down low, and then by the time you're up to the top, it's kind of tuckered out. And it feels a little bit in and out in the rev range as you go through it.
So the EJ engine is a lot more tried and true. People are more familiar with tuning it. We know where the thresholds kind of are, while as the FA engine is still kind of unknown. Whether that's a bad thing or not, that's up to you. However, the power band differences between the two, very clear. The FA has a lot more power down low. It feels a lot more grunty down low, and then it kind of runs out of puff, while as the STI is a lot more up in the top end, which kind of just goes to show what these two cars are kind of about. The STI is a lot more of a track-oriented car. This is something for more people that are going to drive the car hard, really beat on it. While the WRX is the car that someone wants to just drive around town, drive to work, you know, whatever you need to do with it. It seems to really be the way that Subaru's built both cars, not necessarily to make one better than the other, but to make them for different markets, and I think they've really nailed it.
You know, typically you think that stiff suspension is going to make you handle better. On roads like this that are so bumpy, while the STI suspension I'm sure is very competent, it gives me less confidence because the car constantly feels like it's being upset. Meanwhile, the WRX is much more damped, and I like that because it seems to absorb bumps better. And the same goes for the steering ratio, because while it's much shorter and sharper on the STI, with the WRX you have a longer steering ratio, which means that there's more fine tuning that you can put in the middle of a corner. And it results in much smoother inputs for people who aren't driving gods, which I would say about 99% of the population is not. So despite a few areas that I want to nitpick, I feel like the WRX is the car that is going to be more fun more of the time compared to the STI, which is targeted so much in one area. So whereas being on the track, you'll have a fantastic time with the STI almost anywhere. You can have a blast in this WRX.